Good morning, everybody. We will get started in just a little while, about 5 minutes. Hello, Anne. Good morning. Happy Census Day. Merry Census Day.
Try to make it a little bit less glary.
There you go.
Do we have many people registered so far?
We are up to 49.
That's lovely. Trying to turn off all my other devices. They don't make noises.
How are things in Austin today?
They're fine. At least the little microcosm that I can see out my window.
Exactly. Hello, Julia Bazan. Good morning to you. Happy Census Day. AHEC, Laredo, Texas. Julie, while other people are joining, will you tell us what is AHEC in Laredo? And Julie, I've unmuted you. Sorry, so you can go ahead and describe to us what is AHEC? What do y'all do down in Laredo? And let's see, Margarita, it looks like you have your hand raised. Do you have a question before we get started?
It looks like a couple of folks are on mute. Maybe they've muted it themselves. Just to check it. Ah, there we go.
This is Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Julie.
Hi, good morning. I'm sorry, I was trying to play with my settings here, but AHEC stands for Area Health Education Center. And we're located in Laredo, Texas. We serve 6 counties in South Texas, but we're also part of a system of 5 AHECs in South Texas. So together we're serving 35 counties, and our mission is to get everyone counted in those 35 counties.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's exciting, but very, that's a lot of counties to be working across.
Yes, but you know, what makes it doable is if each center, we take the counties that we already serve. For example, in our center, we serve 6 counties, and that's more doable. It kind of take little pieces of the pie instead of looking at the big pie. We're very excited to be part of the Texas Complete Count Committee, and we meet every Friday morning. We've been meeting since December of 2019 to get everybody motivated and enthusiastic about the census. So today is time to celebrate.
Excellent. Yes, it definitely is. And so was last week or the week before y'all's first kind of, virtual meeting, I would imagine, of y'all's kind of planning meetings?
Yes, we did have a meeting last week with all of the AHIC directors on Wednesday, and then we had a meeting with the Complete Count Committee on Friday. And so everybody's being very creative and getting the word out about the census and reaching out a lot of people that I'm thinking to myself, you know, if we're given the right opportunity, and for me personally, this opportunity to be homebound gives us an opportunity to think outside the box, to be creative, be innovative. And I think that's what we're all doing based on what we heard on Friday.
That's definitely what it seems like. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for telling us about your organization.
Thank you.
We'll get started in less than 1 minute, I would imagine.
That is a really snazzy image, Erin.
I'm really happy with it, Anne. It made me so happy.
It's really cute.
Okay, Katie, we started whenever you are ready.
Hi, sorry, I had a big glare on my face, so I shut the shades a little bit. Okay, let's get started. Well, hello everyone. My name is Katie Martin Lightfoot. I'm sure I've connected with many of you before, but I am the Census Community Engagement Coordinator at the Center for Public Policy Priorities. But my other hat that I get to wear is that I also coordinate the Texas Counts campaign. And so we are so excited that you all are joining us for today's activities, starting off, of course, with the one you are on now, which is the Coffee and Census Day Kick-Off. But like I said, we have a lot of other activities to plan today as well. And so at noon, if you're interested in really engaging with your folks on your different social media channels, please join us for the Let's Spread the Word Together happening today at noon Central. And then at 2 p.m., we'll be talking about rethinking the ground game. We'll be having a webinar that's interactive, and that's at 2 p.m. Central. And again, this is for knowing that we're in a different environment now with COVID-19 and thinking about how we can really make sure that we're getting out the count in our communities and kind of rethinking that strategy. And then we'll round out the day at 4:30 with a hard to count happy hour. We will be talking about other things besides hard to count. We will be talking about all things census, and we'll be joined by some folks who, one, are really passionate about the census, but also super knowledgeable, and we'll be talking about how they will be getting out the count in their communities. So if you are interested in joining us for some other events that are happening throughout the day, the link is right there, which is texascounts.me/censusday. RSVP for everything. We're also recording everything as well if you're not able to join anything. But once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Super excited to be celebrating Census Day with you. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Katie. And Anne, would you like to get us started here too?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. This is Ann Beeson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Public Policy Priorities and a very, very proud member of the Texas Counts effort. I first of all just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody around the state who has done such amazing work to get out the count in incredibly challenging circumstances, which of course, as we all know, gotten worse lately because of the horrible COVID-19 pandemic. I just wanted to say a little bit about how we got here, just because it's such a beautiful thing to kind of see this kind of very organic effort have become like a major, have a major impact around the state. So Texas Counts actually, of course, came out of what we all know, which is that the census is so critical for our democracy and our communities and our businesses. But knowing that 25% of Texans live in hard to count neighborhoods, and in other states that have very large populations and a high percentage of hard to count, state legislatures actually stepped in to support the Census Bureau by providing state dollars and sort of help and infrastructure to get out the count. And even though a lot of organizations, including our own, advocated before the state legislature here in Texas to do something, unfortunately, they didn't do anything. They didn't put any money towards the census or create an official statewide complete count committee. And that's when a few of us, really sort of saw, wow, there's a real need to kind of step up and provide some support to all of the great efforts happening in communities all over Texas. And so that's why we got together with our wonderful partners, who I'm sure are going to be joining us for part of today at the Communities Foundation of Texas. And we created the Texas Counts effort. And it includes both our campaign, which is kind of the technical assistance and connector and hub support, which Katie spearheads so beautifully, and also the Texas Counts Pooled Fund, which has now distributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to support community-based efforts to get out the count around Texas. And the most amazing thing is to watch how, when we created the campaign infrastructure, how so many organizations from across sectors, the faith community, the business community, nonprofits, government partners really stepped in to kind of join the effort and get out the count across sectors and across communities here in Texas. So it's really just been, even though it's been quite a challenge, and we know we still have a big challenge and a lot of work to do, it's been really an incredibly inspiring thing to be part of. And I just want to really thank all of you, all of you for everything that you're doing to get out the count, and really excited to kind of hear more about that. I want to just say a little bit about what a big impact the census is going to have on our democracy. And I know so many of us will be highlighting these issues. We know that the census count determines the number of representatives that we have, that we'll have in Congress, and that because of the population boom here in Texas, we stand to gain up to 3 new congressional seats. Also, the census will determine how many electoral votes that Texas gets, which of course is a very critical issue right now in the middle of a presidential year especially. And just on a personal level, I have to just say, I'm a really proud Texan, and I want to make sure that every single one of us, and that is like all 29 million of us, get counted. Too often I get frustrated, and I'm sure you all have shared this experience when talking to folks out of state, and they just never seem to understand just how big we are. I mean, we're really, really big. 1 in 11 Americans lives in Texas. And that means that what happens here influences the rest of the country, not just Texas. That's why it's just so important that we all get counted. And we deserve to be counted as Texans, and we deserve to get the resources and the representation that the census will help provide. And just one final note before I sort of hand it back, kind of one takeaway that I'm really thinking about now, and I know it's so much on all of our minds, that unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis means that the census is more important than ever. That's because the census determines the amount of federal funds that Texas receives for critical programs, including Medicaid, SNAP, which is our food stamp program that helps provide food to hungry families, our school lunch program, student loans, and so many other programs that Texans and Texas families depend on. We actually get about $59 billion a year from the federal government for critical programs that support communities. And that means if there's even a 1% undercount, that could mean a loss of $300 million a year, every year for the next 10 years. And especially with this awful recession that we're all seeing looming because of the COVID crisis, and of course, because of the ongoing public health threat of the crisis, it's more important than ever that all Texans get counted so that we can get those resources that our communities are really going to need to help support them over the next several years. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Erin, and just thank you again, all of you, for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everybody. All right, Katie, would you please do us the honor of introducing our next panelist, who is Kim Walton. I know Kim is an early partner of Texas Counts. So will you tell us a little bit about her? And I believe we have some questions for her.
Yes. So hi again, everyone. I am so excited to introduce one of our biggest census champions, which is Kim Walton. She is with the North Texas Commission, and they've been killing it up in North Texas in terms of just going around. So they typically work with the business community, with folks in that space, but they have been presenting to everyone and anyone who wants to hear about the census in North Texas. So lots of presentations, lots of getting folks involved in the census efforts, and just really helping to push the get out the count effort up in North Texas. And I don't know if there's a correlation, but there might be, but North Texas is currently one of the strongest regions in terms of getting out the count in our state. And I'm sure some of that is attributed to the great work that they've been doing. But without further ado, I'd love to pass it over to Kim to kind of talk us through what they've been doing, engaging the business sector and all things census.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, and Katie, thank you guys so much, because honestly, you guys are that tip of the spear for us, and we couldn't have done it without everything you guys have been doing for the last few years, pulling us together. You are our census champions, so thank you so much. But really, as Katie said, anybody who would let us talk, we'd talk to them. And the whole idea was to kind of use that get out the vote type campaign, the employer to employee, but make it a get out the count. And so we probably started talking to groups at least a year ago, if not a little bit sooner than that. But officially within the last 6 months or so, going out to different business groups, chambers, talking to our board and our membership about it. Starting about 2 months ago, we started having census messages go out every week, both in English and Spanish. And, maybe, and this could be part of why we're doing so well, is maybe the community thinks that if they just do the census, we'll shut up. That could be part of it. But, we really are proud of our community. And I think, it just speaks to the business community up here and the leadership. And they realize that, not just the growth of our state, but the growth of the region, that we've really got to make sure every single person is counted. And if we can take care of that, quote unquote, easy to count population, then we can really focus efforts on the harder to count population. But, I have to say, I'm very proud of our business community, our chamber partners, all of the associations that we've been talking to, because they've been taking that message and amplifying it to their community as well.
Awesome. And so as Katie mentioned, y'all really have been killing it in North Texas, not only in engaging the business sector, but also the self-response rate. And Dr. Valencia in our weekly update this week on Monday talked about just how great the self-response rate is in North Texas. And so I'm going to put North Texas on the spot in a very positive way and just pull up some data that shows, if we look at this, is of course the Credit Research Center hard to count map, and this kind of view of the map, then the lighter orange, kind of like a dreamsicle color, is good. And so there is a very high self-response rate in that area. And if we want to look at some of those specific numbers, let's see, and I'll let you, Kim, react to this. But 40.1% in Rockwall County is just awesome. Denton County, 37.6%, Collin County, 39.6%. So just talk us through some of that. Why do you think that you have such a great response up in North Texas?
Well, for Rockwall, for example, I actually spoke to one of the cities in Rockwall, and it's a city that is experiencing quite a bit of growth. Gosh, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but when I went to present, they had gone from, a few thousand to nearly, 8,000 just within a few years. So they really are a fast growing community. And I sat through a lot of traffic getting up there. So I think that's a community that the message of infrastructure needs, the growth, make sure everybody's counted, because we know there's a lot more people here today than there was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, really resonated with them. Same with Denton and Collin County. Those are counties that are experiencing a lot of growth, and you've got a lot of people, and their leadership within those counties have been talking about, get out the count, make it count. Dallas County isn't that far behind, because they've got a really strong get out the count program that the city and the county are partnering together on. They started, gosh, I think Elizabeth and I started this together about 2 years ago. So, they, unfortunately, I think a lot of their efforts are now kind of focused on COVID-19, because they got hit pretty hard as being, a very urban, populous county. But I think they're probably almost green, just considering how much effort they've put into it. But I think what you're seeing is, we all took it very, very seriously. And, I've said this before that, there's this, like Ann, we're very proud Texans, and there's this kind of bootstrapper mentality that we have, that if you tell us something can't be done, we're just like, watch this. We can do it. We can do it better than what you even thought we could do. So I think we all kind of saw this challenge and said, challenge accepted. We're going to knock this out of the ballpark and look good doing it. So.
And I have to just jump in, Kim, it's so funny. I see this like really high number for Collin County, and my mom lives up in McKinney, Texas, and she has actually been very plugged into all the census committee up there. And she's like one of these people, she's 82, who knows, like, I swear to God, like 10,000 people. And so I'm just going to say, I think that 39% might have something to do with mom and her efforts too.
Well, and that's a lot of it too, is just, talking to your communities. The minute we got our census form in the mail, we did it. And it's funny, because I've actually had a lot of, folks that I know through work that they emailed me and said, I did my census. It's almost like they just needed my approval. Exactly. But, and again, like I said, maybe they thought that just telling me I'd take them off those mailing lists. But yeah, there's a lot of people that understand the importance of it, and they're sharing that message, and then they're telling us back that they've done it. So, but I love seeing those numbers. I think
right?
Yeah, well, and when you go out and you're talking to groups and you're sharing that message and you're just like, you're trying not to look at the people who's, playing solitaire on their phone, but it's really cool to kind of go, hey, they were all listening. They got it. They understand. This works. So, we know that getting out there early, getting out there often, and that consistent statewide drum really can make a difference. So it's reassuring to see that.
Yeah, definitely. And just one small anecdote is one of my best friends grew up in Rockwall, and there's a stereotype, and we call it all the time a Rockwall boy. And he's an Eagle Scout, and he's like super civically engaged, and they're very beautiful. So yeah, I do think there's a cultural aspect to kind of how we see, our place in the community, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And so, we've all kind of been talking a little bit about adjusting our strategies and how we're going to, go. Now we have 2 extra weeks to get out the count and self-response. And so what are some of the ways you anticipate, you'll just kind of have to keep reevaluating? What are some kind of key dates for y'all? And how do you see yourself continuing to evolve as a campaign?
I think, what we're really looking at is doing a lot more online, a lot more social. So this afternoon, we've got our business counts subcommittee call. I'm also going to work on scheduling another call. We've had calls with chambers because those are key organizations to help spread that message, because they also have the business community. And a lot of theirs tend to be smaller businesses. So just, really offering more resources, offering online resources. We have a video that we posted today on Facebook that is a fun little 30-second video about the importance of getting counted. I heard this campaign from Ready Nation that I'm going to launch today also, called the Census Challenge. And it's, you say that you've completed the census and you tag 3 people that you can count on. And the whole idea is to make it somewhat viral online. So we'll be doing that today as well. So really, and we don't want to be too tongue-in-cheek with the, hey, we're all home, do it online. But there is, honestly, having that online version is probably the best thing ever, because it's social distancing friendly. There is no contact involved. You can do it online. We're all home right now. There's no better time to do the census. And, we did it within, I think it was like 5 minutes. So, as I posted on Facebook, you can do it in between episodes of The Tiger King. It takes no time to do it. So.
Yes, exactly.
But really, it's just, focusing on, and we've also used, as Ann mentioned, the number about the stats on the emergency funding. I heard that with Congressman Vesey a week or so ago in a town hall that he had, and at that point, it hadn't really dawned on me, like, oh my gosh, you're right. Those are numbers. Because here in North Texas, we don't get hit by very many hurricanes. So we don't really get a ton of federal funding. So it's one of those things that this is really unusual for us to kind of look at it a little differently. So we've really been focusing on that message of, hey guys, we've got to make sure this really counts, because you never know when the next need for federal funding is going to come. And we've got to make sure we have enough for everybody.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And then before I hand it back to Katie, we are going to be asking people this question throughout the day, but we talked so much about the numbers and our strategies and, the actual work we're doing in getting out the count, but just on a very personal level, what does the census mean to you?
I have a niece and nephew that are 9 years old, and in 10 years, they're going to be finishing high school and starting their college careers. And I think about them, because we really have only one shot for my niece and nephew to have everything they need for the remainder of their public school career. And I want to make sure that we've, for all of the kids out there, not just those guys, but for everybody, we give them everything they need to be successful, because they really are the future of our region, the future of our state. So thank you, guys. I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing out the great work that y'all have been doing in North Texas. And also, if y'all are curious to see some of those great resources that Kim was talking about, I popped them into our chat box. So check them out. And I also linked both their YouTube videos that come in English and Spanish as well, which is really great. Moving right along, we have another census champion that will be speaking with y'all today, and her name is Katie Mitten, and she is from Texans Care for Children. And she has just been a rock star across the state in terms of talking to folks about why, one, it is so important to make sure that we are counting our youngest Texans. And so without further ado, I want to hand it over to Katie to talk about the counting young kiddos.
Hi, well, thanks for having me this morning. I'm really excited to be here. Counting our youngest children and young children have been undercounted in previous censuses. This has been an ongoing and growing problem. And so, if you care about keeping Texas kids healthy, it's important to help bring, health and nutrition dollars to Texas by encouraging families with young kids to participate in the census. So that's why Texans Care for Children is doing this work related to the census. And, if you look at our website, we have a subpage. It's txchildren.org/census. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do any screen sharing during this coffee chat, but that's a great resource. When you look there, there's a lot of resources that show just what all of the programs and the federal dollars that could be coming to Texas if we have an accurate count. But, if we miss kids, we miss the funding for things like Head Start and Medicaid and CHIP, which are super critical right now during the COVID crisis. Also things like SNAP and education funding and childcare subsidies, as well as early childhood intervention services for our youngest kids with delays and disabilities. So it's super important that we make sure families are not only completing the census, but that they're completing it accurately and counting all of their kids, even the youngest ones that aren't in school yet. So I wanted to kind of share, I think, a little bit about what some of our partners are doing. We at Texans Care for Children was very lucky to get a grant from the New Venture Fund and the Hog Foundation, and we were able to re-grant some small grants to some of our partners across the state. And so we have 8 organizations across the state that are doing outreach, and as you can imagine, they have had to change and pivot their strategy with the COVID crisis and not able to do a lot of the events and meetings that they had planned to host. So I wanted to share some of the strategies that they're implementing to try and get out the count of young kids, if that's okay with y'all. Okay, perfect. So our friends in El Paso at the YWCA, they are using, they're reaching out to their local radio stations and trying to get some radio messages out to families. This was not initially one of their major strategies, but has become a top priority for them. They're also trying to work with the with the PBS station in their community, because we know lots of young kids are at home. All kids of all ages are at home, and hopefully they're watching educational programming like PBS. But PBS stations across the state, a lot of them have something called Bright by Text. And they can text, families can sign up for text messages about child development and different things that they can do with their kids to promote healthy development. And so the YWCA in El Paso is trying to partner with the Bright by Text program with the PBS station to try and get out some census messages through Bright by Text. I know this is also a strategy that's happening, I think, here in Austin, where I'm located. They're also trying to, this is something that me and Katie Martin were talking about as well, trying earlier this week about, focusing on those locations where essential services are still happening and trying to use the materials that maybe you had printed and intended to distribute at a big event, but that event's not happening. How can you reach out to places like grocery stores or childcare centers that are still operating for essential employees, or food banks, or health clinics, and see if you can drop off some of those materials so that families that go there can access those materials. Another idea that I've heard is people are, if they have addresses to families that they work with, taking those materials and mailing them to them so they receive a personalized piece of mail in addition to obviously the mailers that the Census Bureau is distributing. We've also heard about, potentially doing a phone tree where you call one person and they call another mom or dad that has young kids. And it's a good way to connect during this time of social distancing and physical distancing, just having a conversation about how people are doing, and then, hey, have you filled out the census? You could also do that by, if you don't want to call, you could do a text tree as another option. Also, something really cool that I heard about today from the city of McAllen, their McAllen Public Libraries are doing online Facebook story time for kids. And so parents can log on and listen to a story read by a librarian, and then they're integrating some census messaging into those recordings of books. And they are doing this in English and in Spanish. So that's something any library could do if they're trying to figure out how to serve families. Also, I don't know how many libraries are doing this, but in McAllen, people can reserve books online and have a book held, and then they could do a curbside pickup of the book. And so the library there, I think they said that they are doing 20 to 25 of those curbside hold books pickup option a day. And so they're putting some census flyers and information in those books as families are picking them up to take them home and enjoy. And then there's also the great We Count ebook, which is available online and is a great option for families to read to their kids while at home during this time. And then also it has some additional activities that parents and teachers can use to engage kids in the importance of the census, and it kind of has some fun counting activities for young kids. And then of course, social media, that's kind of the obvious one that I think everyone can't keep their eyes off of as we're trying to keep track of what's happening with COVID-19. And then also just a great way to reach people and to reach families that are active on social media. So we created a new social media toolkit. It's at the txchildren.org/census. You can find it there. And it has images specifically about that highlight young kids and the importance of counting them. And then we have some template messages that you can easily copy paste, kind of plug and go. And we have them specifically for each kind of major social media channel. We have some for Facebook, we have some for Twitter, we have some for Instagram. And we know that Texans Care for Children is a policy advocacy organization, and so we don't have a huge following of families. So we're not the ones that are going to be able to reach them, but we're trying to create these tools that people who have families following them on social media, they can use those messages and get the information out. Yeah, so I think those are kind of the key things I wanted to make sure to touch on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katie. And she mentioned quite a few resources. So I, excuse me, and included the Texans Care, their census page, the We Count ebook, as well as those two really great social media toolkits that they pulled together. And again, all of their resources are in English and Spanish, and so hopefully you're able to utilize those to connect with some families. I do have a few more questions for you, Katie, and this is talking more about the census on a personal level. So would love to know why the census is so important to you.
Yeah, well, I have two young nephews that are 2 and 3, and I just think about you know, all of the resources and things that they're going to need over the next decade in their community to make sure that they are growing up healthy and strong and have schools that can provide them with the resources that they need. I think about, you know, the roads that their parents and I will drive them around on, and where they'll ride their bikes, and the fact that these census dollars impact the money that communities have to make sure roads are safe and that they will be safe on those roads. So I think everyone has kids in their life that they can picture and imagine what they want life to be like for them over the next decade, and the census plays a huge role in that, and making sure that we have the funding and the representation that we need to make sure that kids are prioritized and kids have the resources that they need.
Thanks, Katie. And one more question. In terms of where we're at in the 2020 census today, and knowing how important it is to make sure that we are counting our youngest Texans, how do you think we're doing so far? And yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on kind of where we're at in terms of the census in Texas.
Yeah, I know. I haven't looked at it this morning, but I know as of yesterday, we were lagging behind a little bit the rest of the country. And you know, you can access that through the map that is available through the Census Bureau, and then also through CUNY census maps. Those are great maps for people to know about if you want to kind of keep track of how Texas is doing overall, and how the each county, or even down to the census tract, how well we are doing in terms of the percentage of people who are have responded. You know, the challenge with that is that those maps don't tell us the accuracy of what people are actually putting on the form. So we know, you know, 30% of people have completed the form. We don't know that 30% of people with young kids have made sure to include every young kid that they have living with them on the form. So that's a challenge. We won't know until the census is said and done. And, you know, hopefully in December and the beginning of 2021, we'll have the results and we can have a better idea of if we've undercounted kids or not. But, you know, I feel confident that there are a lot of people out there, a lot of partners that we have that we're working with that are really making sure kids are prioritized and families know to include them. You know, I wish that the state had included some funding for us. I think that definitely would have helped, funding for census outreach, but we're grateful to Texas Counts and all of the private funders that have allowed us to try and get the word out here in Texas.
Thank you so much, Katie. Lots of great information. And as I said, all the resources she shared are in the Zoom chat, and they are currently being put into the Facebook Live chat. And one thing of note, since we are talking about our youngest Texans, that if you know someone who's pregnant and having their baby today, make sure that they are counted on the second, or not, oh my gosh, on the second, on the first, because they were born on April 1st, so they get to be counted on the census. So whether your child is born today, or you have a 2-year-old or 10-year-old, make sure that they're counted on the census.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's actually my cousin's birthday, and I always thought it was funny growing up that his birthday was on April 1st, which most people think of as, you know, April Fool's Day. So it's a fun birthday to have. So congratulations to any parents that are having a baby today.
Yeah, one of my favorite things, I'm not sure if y'all have seen them, but they do have little onesies that will say the census on them. And so I'm hoping that babies are getting those today at the hospitals. Thanks so much, Katie.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now I would like to pass it over to my census partner in crime, Ms. Genesis Sanchez from NALEO Educational Fund. She is the census manager here in Texas. And so I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with NALEO, but they are partners with the Census Bureau. And so they're actual a national organization that has been doing extremely great work for decades. And we are so fortunate to have Genesis and Elizabeth in our state doing great census work. Genesis has literally been all over the state doing train the trainer trainings. And so she knows everything about census operations, but also has a really good idea of what's happening on the ground. So welcome, Genesis.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. Yeah, so as Katie mentioned, I have been across the state. And so COVID-19 pulled me back into my apartment. And it's been a really weird shift, right? Because so many of the organizations, including us and including the ones that we were training, were really hoping that we could do that direct outreach during this time. And so it's been definitely a shift, but I'm happy to share some of the information as the Census Bureau also changes their plans. And so one of the key things is that the Bureau is taking into consideration and very seriously monitoring the situation around COVID-19. And as you can imagine, their staff can't go into the office in the same way that we can't go into the office. And so one of the key things, as I'll show in the next slide, is that oops, sorry. So before I get into that, I do want to, I'm sure as everybody has reiterated, we have to continue kind of helping our communities go online or get on the phone and respond as much as they can. I think the attention has been on COVID for all the right reasons, right? But today is a day of action, and we really want people to kind of get a little bit more sense of what they are doing when they respond to the census. And as Katie shared too, we want accurate data. We want people to say exactly who's living at home. We want them to really take that into consideration. We also want to share kind of some of the information, things like college students, right? They're in flux too. A lot of them went home to be a little bit more comfortable than they would have been on campus. And so they're in flux and they may not know exactly where they need to count themselves. So you're hearing it here. College students, if they were planning on being on campus or in off-campus housing on April 1st, they should still continue to count themselves at that location. And the reason for that is because the Bureau wants people to count themselves where they're going to be, right? Where do you access services? Where do you wake up, go grab your coffee, drop off your kids, go to school? So where do you use services essentially? Another thing is that as we're shifting, as the Census Bureau is shifting their operations, we need to really be keeping an eye out for folks who live in group quarters. So when we talk about group quarters, we're talking about people who live in, maybe they live in retirement homes, maybe they visit, they have to live in homeless shelters, or maybe they live in some kind of residential group setting in which they're getting some level of assistance. And so we may have family members who are living in those situations. And it's important for us to also check in on them and ask them, hey, are you being counted? And help the Bureau in this way as well. And in addition, we want to make sure our homeless population continues to get counted. And so those states have shifted a little bit as well. And it's likely that they'll continue to shift, right? This is an ongoing and changing situation. But as we continue to do this work, yes, we're thinking about the majority of us who receive invitations kind of in a more traditional way, but we have to think about folks who maybe are not accessing the information the same way that we are. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the Bureau is suspending their 2020 census field operations until April 15th. And again, this is going to impact not the majority of us, but a very key part of our population. And that's folks who live kind of on the border regions and that also live in rural areas where they don't receive mailings in, they may have PO boxes, for example. And although this is kind of a small part of the universe as the Census Bureau likes to call it, we still, again, we are going to have, one of the ways that we can be really helpful right now is to get everybody mobilized and ask them to do the census so that when the census enumerators are able to go back into the field, they can spend a little bit more time and attention to these areas that might need a little bit more assistance. In addition, the deadline to self-respond has been delayed until August 14th. And this is important because some people are saying, well, why not cancel the census altogether, right? We're living in unprecedented times. Yes, we are, but the Census Bureau has also, they've conducted censuses through the Spanish flu. So this isn't their first rodeo. And the August 14th deadline gives them a little bit more time to get as many people counted as possible. And lastly, one thing that we're really excited about is that in the forthcoming week, the Bureau is going to send out paper forms to those homes that haven't responded yet, either by online or by phone. And one thing that we saw in our research as we were working with Latino populations is that a lot of our population still very much prefers to do their census over paper. We're a little old school like that. And so we're actually really hopeful that once those paper forms start to roll out, people are going to see, here's another invitation, here's another touch. And so they're going to come back and actually fill out the form. And so we're still hopeful, right? There's still a lot of time. There's still, Census Day is not the only day for us to be mobilizing our troops. And so we still have a lot of opportunities to talk about the census. And then if we want to go to the next slide. So again, as I mentioned, a lot of what we're seeing now is that self-response is going to include that paper form, and that's going to be really key to mobilizing certain populations in the state. And in addition, the Census Bureau is also shifting their media campaigns, so they recognize that they have to adjust. One thing that they were planning on doing was that they were going to be blowing up ads in Times Square. As of right now, there's nobody in Times Square, and so they're funneling that money and those actions into reaching people more directly on social media. And so we commend them for that. We understand that it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to move things so quickly. And we know that they're trying to adjust to a new landscape as well.
Genesis, I have a quick question.
Sure.
On my weekly update, you mentioned, or it was either this week or last week, you mentioned that one of the factors that may influence kind of self-response rate the farther we get into the summer is the fact that we're in a presidential election year. How do you think that might impact kind of the attention on the census?
Yeah, so that's one of the things is that the farther we keep moving the census away from April 1st, it's a number of things. So one is that your data isn't that good. People forget where they are April 1st, even though for most of us, we're going to remember where we were quarantined. It's still, sometimes people see the form and then they forget. And then it's like you said, there's a lot of different noise. So people might think, well, is this associated with the presidential election? And in addition, I think one of the key things too is that people are starting to associate the census with COVID-19 because the timing was right at, it happened right at the same time. And so we have to make sure to continue to keep the focus. The census is one thing, the presidential election is another. You don't have to be a citizen to participate in the census. Everybody counts. So yeah, I think that's a great question and a great thing to kind of keep focus on and make sure that people recognize what the differences are.
Cool. Genesis, I also know that as a national organization that NALEO has tons of great resources. So I'd love to hear about, I know you touched on it a little bit, but specifically how NALEO is pivoting during this time to make sure that we are getting out to count, but more specifically in Texas and some of the resources that y'all have.
Yeah, so once we realized we had to shift, we created a digital toolkit, and inside of that toolkit it's a bilingual toolkit, and the idea behind it was to give our partners something easy they could grab, plug in, adapt to their situations, and send out email, essentially use their digital outreach to send out reminders and to continue doing that advocacy just online. And I think it's hard, right? It's really hard to come up with your own thing, especially when your staff is being asked to work remotely. And when there's just a lot of different, situations happening where you don't necessarily have access to maybe to like digital content, right? And so we wanted to make that really easy. Another thing is that we continue to keep our hotline operations open. And so our operations are also bilingual. They're open from 7:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Central Time. And the idea behind the hotline is for our community members to call and ask any questions that they might have. We've gotten a number of calls already, most of them around the race and ethnicity question. And so we want to continue to be a trusted source of information for our community. And for me in particular, I think it's very important that we are sharing Spanish language resources, because many times we're not getting that, right? Our community members are not receiving that information directly. And so I'm really proud of the work that our team has been able to do with such a quick turnaround.
Thanks, Genesis. Without putting you on the spot, I've also heard folks talking about some confusion around the ethnicity and race questions. So could you touch a little bit on how folks can fill that out?
Yeah, so the key thing, so I'm going to speak for Latinos. For Latino population, the key thing is that people do both. So a lot of times, this is why it's very confusing. We did a lot of advocacy around this. There has been a lot of confusion. When you look at the question, the first question is, are you of Hispanic or Latino origin? And then the next question is, what is your race? And so the Bureau doesn't identify Hispanic origin or background as a race. They see it as something distinct. And so people look at it and they're like, well, I answered one, why would I have to answer the second one? So we also have this guidance because we know people are gonna get these questions as well. And unfortunately, there's no cut and dry answer to this question. A lot of times what I tell people is, how do you self-identify? And if you don't see yourself there, then maybe some other race is where you would want to include something. I think one of the things that this brings up is that racial dynamics in the United States are very different from countries of origin. So it may look very different in South America than it does here. So people are asking us questions that we necessarily can't answer for them, right? But we do have a guide, and we're happy to share this as well and let people know, if kind of some talking points to help guide people through an answer if they have any questions on that. But the most important thing is to answer both.
Awesome, thanks, Genesis. And then my last question, which I think you also touched on a little bit, is you have been driving across the state and doing hours upon hours of training. So why is the census so important to you? Why have you driven hundreds of miles to make sure folks are counted?
I think for me, so this, I'm going to reiterate what a lot of people have reiterated, but I think a lot of times Latino communities are not taken into account, not to belabor the point, but I think so many times because we're considered as part of mixed status families, many of our community members are undocumented. A lot of times people literally count us out. They say this is a population that doesn't matter because they can't vote. That's not true, right? With the census, we have an opportunity to make ourselves count and to say, hey, we're here and we demand political power, we demand representation, and we demand better communities for ourselves and for our children. And so it has been a labor of love to go out into communities and to help, inform our community and let them know, this is something that's yours. You can use it because when we boil it down, what it is, it's about money and power. And so we want to make sure that our community knows that and that they are taking the steps to make themselves get counted.
I love that. Thank you so much, Genesis. And all of the resources that Genesis shared out, we put them in the chat box. So please check out their awesome communications toolkit, their hotline number. Make sure that you're sharing that with the folks you're engaging with. And then, of course, last but not least, the guidance for Latino respondents on the race and ethnicity question. I think there's a lot of really great takeaways. So thanks again, Genesis, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Now Now I want to pass it over to one of my census friends from East Texas, Miss Davina Morris, that Kim shared what's going on in one of our more urban spaces, that being Dallas and surrounding counties. But I also want to highlight some of the great work that has been happening across our state and more specifically in deep East Texas. And so Davina, without further ado, I would love for you to share out what you've been doing up in East Texas.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having us. I know that we're a little part of Texas, but Deep East Texas has a lot of heart. You know, Deep East Texas is one of the hard to count areas. And so we've really had some challenges even before COVID, because a lot of our areas, they don't have access to broadband or internet. So that was one of our first issues, is that, you know, how are they going to get online and complete the census, because some of the rural areas were not going to receive a packet because they don't have city style addresses. So what we did, a part of Deep East Texas Council of Governments, which I'm overseeing our Deep East Texas Counts outreach program, we got 12 community coordinators or county coordinators for each of our 12 counties. And those coordinators were responsible for going out to promote the census in any way they can. They were going to events, they were going to their elected officials, the county judges were involved, and just kind of really promoting the census in those areas, trying to make sure that people knew that the census was coming and that they were able to know all of the ways that they could fill out the census. Well, with COVID-19, we know that unfortunately, a lot of those events have been canceled or postponed. So we've really had to sort of revamp and go back to the drawing board. And so we've kind of realized, with the help of our media consultant, that our best avenue is going to be social media and even television advertising and radio PSAs. And one of the things that I thought was really neat and maybe beneficial to someone else is that over-the-top TV or streaming TV, we're targeting some ads in our areas, our zip codes, to get those ads out, because we know that most people are at home and, you know, they're using Netflix, they're using Hulu, they're, you know, binge watching, which I know I have been, you know, doing that. So I'm in a nighttime, but you know, really using those opportunities that we have to get the census out. We also have some schools that have been very helpful to us. They've allowed us to put flyers in their mail outs when they send out report cards or anything that they're sending out to their students. Also, some of our local water districts have allowed us to put mail outs in their water bills. And even with the community now with COVID-19, I know one of the issues here for us is a concern for our children having nutritious meals. And so a lot of different churches and community agencies have been either allowing drive-throughs to pick up food boxes or meals. And one of the things that we've done is we have some little stickers that say "I count" with the census.gov website on there. And we just stuck those stickers on the to-go plates, you know, just to remind people, hey, while you're at home, go ahead and, you know, do your census. And I remember being there and one lady says, "Oh yeah, I forgot I need to go home and do my census." You know, the sticker reminded her. And we've also been giving out flyers. We also have a church that's doing a pantry pack. So they're giving packs of food to children that they can kind of cook on their own, or, you know, Pop-Tarts, thing that they can just eat while they're at home, maybe if a parent is away at work and they can't cook. And so we plan on slipping some flyers in there and some stickers for those kids, because, you know, kids love stickers, and really they don't care what it says, but they all say "I count." So we want to utilize those opportunities to get the word out.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Davina. And I think this is just a really good example of how an area has really had to pivot their entire strategy. And so really excited to hear that y'all are doing things on all fronts, thinking about engaging the media, but also using your social media. And then I love connecting with essential locations in your area. And so whenever I have had the joy of getting to go visit you in Lufkin, Texas, you are so passionate about the census, and I'd love for you to share with folks why the census is so important to you, why it's so important to your community, and Deep East Texas.
Well, you know, in Deep East Texas, we do have, like I said, the challenge of being a rural community. And so, you know, we need to make sure that everybody is counted so that we can get those funds that affect us. We have, you know, we need school funds for school lunch programs, for housing, for, you know, roads, different things that, you know, we need in the rural community. And those funds are going to depend on everyone in our community being counted. And so, you know, we're really just trying to get the word out there to make sure no matter who you are, no matter where you live, if you have the internet or you don't, that those people get counted, because we need that for rural Texas, and, you know, just to make sure that everyone is counted. And I believe Genesis made the comment as well about, you know, the Latino community not feeling like that they're, you know, apart because they can't vote. And so I think also sometimes, I know I can speak for the African American community, sometimes they feel like maybe their voice doesn't matter. And so we want to make sure we've been utilizing our churches and our faith-based organization leaders to get the word out through their churches, through their various faith-based organizations, because I feel like I know in the African American community, if they hear it coming from someone they trust, then they're more likely to believe it and they're more likely to do it. So we've also been trying to utilize those faith-based organizations to say, hey, if you can, you know, put this in your church announcements, if you can, you know, slip this in your bulletin, your church bulletin, or something like that, then, you know, we're more likely to get those participants to fill out the census because it's coming from someone they trust.
Thank you so much. And I don't think that's something we've highlighted today, just the importance of those trusted messengers in our communities. And even though we might not physically be seeing folks in person, knowing that those voices are just as strong if it's through a mailing or over an email, social media. And so thanks so much to Vina for highlighting that. And then in terms of kind of how operations have been going and how the count is going, how's it going up in East Texas?
It's going pretty good. Our numbers were a little bit low. I checked last week and I sent those numbers and those maps out to our county coordinators. But again, we know that some of our residents are waiting for those packets and getting those packets in the mail because some of them don't have access to the internet. And the other issue is the ones that don't have access to the internet and that are not going to receive a packet. Right now, they don't have access to go to the library to use a computer or to go to one of those stations because, you know, with the bans, actually, Angelina County now has a stay-at-home order. So, you know, those are kind of our challenges right now, you know, as far as getting those numbers up. But we're optimistic, and our county coordinators, which I have a few that are online with us today, they're very positive. I mean, they are go-getters, and I have no doubt that they're going to push to get those numbers in and to make sure that everyone is counted in their area.
Thank you so much, Davina. And as I said, I've gotten the opportunity to go up and visit with folks in Lufkin and Angelina County and their census coordinators. And there is a lot of heart up there. And let us know if you need any assistance in getting out the count. And then I think this just kind of shows whether you're in a urban county or rural county, we're all in this together in terms of making sure that every Texan is counted. So thanks again so much for your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then our last speaker of the day, who I'm really excited to have present for us, is Dr. Lila Valencia from this Texas Demographic Center. Lila is a census queen. She knows everything about the census, and she is also so great when it comes to understanding and explaining the data. And so we are so fortunate to have her on our webinar today to kind of share out how we are doing in Texas. So Lila, take it away.
Hi, Katie. Hello, everyone. Yes, I just wanted to share a little bit of information with you. We've been looking at different sort of data maps that are resources that are available to you in trying to understand what's happening with the census and what, how our state has been growing during the past decade. So I'm going to share with you a couple of resources. One of the very first ones, if you go to the next slide, so I list 3 resources here. And the very first one is the Census Bureau Self-Response Map. Erin shared this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but the link is here where you can get access to that map. And that map, I feel, is really good to sort of get a general kind of snapshot of where we are in terms of self-response. And so self-response, just to be clear, is the number of households that have completed the census on their own, either by going online or calling in, responding by phone, or if they received a paper form, mailing that in. And it's a percentage of all of the housing units that the Census Bureau has invited to participate. Now, self-response provides the most accurate information because it's information that we are providing. We are providing it really close to that census date. And so it's the most accurate and most cost-effective way for people to respond to the census. So cost-effective how? Well, if we don't respond on our own, then the Census Bureau has to send out an enumerator. And as we heard from Genesis earlier in the operations update, this may not be for a while. Enumerators are not going door to door right now, but it's still a really expensive way for us to get counted. And it's also not just expensive to the Census Bureau, but it's really expensive to the organizations locally that are really subsidizing the census count in the state of Texas. And so we really want to encourage as many people as we can to self-respond on their own by going online or calling their phone number. And if they live in one of those internet choice areas where they're getting a paper form, then they can mail that in as well. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about what we know in terms of self-response. Well, I guess I'll share the other 2 resources that are here really quickly. So the next one is the CUNY Hard to Count map. I think a lot of us have seen that. And in the next slide, I'm going to share some information on that. Yeah, so this is the CUNY Hard to Count map. And a lot of us are probably pretty familiar with this map. You can get it at Census Hard to Count Maps 2020.us. And you can get information also on self-response at different geographies. Here we're showing the self-response for Texas as of yesterday. It was 31.3%. That compares to a national response of over 36%. So Texas is ranked about 42nd. I'll tell you, we started at about 48. We got really excited because in the first few days we moved up to 43. But then, this is a little bit of a sobering statistic. We moved up to 42nd after the state of New York dropped to 43rd. And we know that they have been one of the most heavily hit states through this whole coronavirus pandemic. And so it was a little bit of a bittersweet moment to see that Texas was moving up, but we kind of understood how Texas was moving up past New York State. But we have a long way to go. And this map, I feel, is a really helpful tool in really doing a deeper dive and understanding how people are self-responding, giving us a sense of who they may be, where we need to focus more efforts. As Erin mentioned earlier in the presentation, these lighter shaded orange counties in the state of Texas are the higher performing counties as of right now. So they have over 40% in Rockwall County, for instance, responding to the 2020 census. And so North Texas region has been really knocking it out of the ballpark. They have been doing really, really well. Now you'll also notice that there's some areas of darker orange, and those areas are closer to the Rio Grande border, and they're particularly between El Paso and the Rio Grande Valley. A lot of these areas are actually areas that had been scheduled to receive what's called update leave from the Census Bureau. So they check out an address, they update their address list, and then they leave a packet with an actual Census Bureau form, and that's why it's called Update Leave. As Genesis mentioned, that's one of the Census Bureau operations that's really been delayed. And so a lot of people in this area have not received their Census Bureau invitation as of yet. Now, these are also areas that can respond by using a non-response ID response method. So they can still go online, they can still call and use a non-response ID. However, we understand that these are areas that are also more likely to have lower access to the internet and less reliable phone service. So it's definitely going to take more creative ways to reach out to these communities. And in fact, that's what this map is really good for. It really helps you to, zoom into those local areas and understand. There's a toggle button in that Census 2020 details for Texas. If you actually pull down that arrow, you'll be able to see more options that you can explore on all of these areas, and you can zoom in down to the census tract level to understand whether this is an area that did have update leave, and so therefore that's why they're not responding yet. If it's an area where they had internet choice, and maybe it's important to go ahead and remind them, to go ahead and either fill out that paper form or go online or call. You can understand if there are more Spanish speaking individuals in that area, higher foreign born. So it's a really useful tool that you can use for all of those ways. And I'm going to also let you know that this group of researchers out of CUNY have put together a really helpful analysis, and they will be doing this on a weekly basis, where they're correlating sort of the response rates that we're seeing in the different areas. And then they're looking at a number of characteristics and statistics to figure out, well, how does this compare for where we were last year in 2010? And so, for instance, in 2010, CUNY found that by today, we had been increasing our daily average response to the census, to the census 2010, at a rate of about 3.8%. Currently, we're growing at a rate of about 2%. And so we're not responding, and our level of response isn't growing as fast as it was in 2010. And that's even though we have different methods of responding, right? So this year we have, in addition to the mail, which is what was used primarily in 2010, we also have phone, and we also have the internet option. And we understand that we are in, like Genesis described, unprecedented times. But we really need to make sure that we understand that there are still ways that our communities can participate. Now, like I mentioned, CUNY's doing a weekly analysis, and we'll be happy to share out some of that information with you. But I want to tell you just really quickly some of the relationships that they've found right now is that the Hispanic population has the lowest sort of self-response numbers right now compared to other race and ethnicity groups. And so, of course, they did that by looking at census tracts that had higher proportions of Hispanics and compared it to high proportions of African American, high proportions of Asian American, and other race ethnicity groups. And unfortunately, response is the lowest for Hispanics. So we really need to work really hard to get self-response increases in the Hispanic community. We also found that, or they also found that foreign-born populations or areas with lower incomes, areas where there are a greater number of renters, and areas where there are limited English proficiency communities are also having lower response rates when compared to a reference group. And so these are all really important groups in the state of Texas. We have over 4.8 million foreign-born people in Texas, about 4.2 million lower income households. So, and then 1 in 3 people in Texas is a renter. So we really need to make sure that we start to use these more targeted maps that allow us to really be strategic in the way we are allocating our resources and our attention to get self-response up in some of these areas. And then lastly, I'll share a map with you that we put together at the Texas Demographic Center. and that's going to be on the next slide. This is a population change map that we put together using the Census Bureau's population estimates for 2019. And so basically what we did is we looked to see what areas of the state were increasing in population between 2010 and 2019, what areas were decreasing, and then looked to see what was driving that growth or that decline. All of those dark blue areas that you see that are really anchored by that population triangle with the big metro areas are areas of the state that are growing in population between this time period, and most of their growth is coming from in-migration. So this is all new people moving into the state of Texas. This is going to be really important for our decennial counts because this is where many of the new construction, the new housing units that are being built, people who aren't familiar with the resources that we have as a state and in the local areas are going to be moving to. The lighter blue areas are places where we're growing, but the growth is coming from natural increase or from births minus deaths. Now, this is going to be a really important area for the 2020 census as well, because this is the area where all those brand new little native Texans that we're adding to the population, this is where they're located. And we want to make sure that we count all of them in these in the 2020 census. And then the red areas are areas of the state that are going to need attention because they are losing a lot of assets. And so, for instance, these are areas that are losing population through decline, throughout migration. So a lot of people are moving to other parts of the state or other parts of the country. And then the light orange areas are places where we're losing population, but it's because there are actually more deaths than births in that area. And so they are experiencing what's called natural decline. Now you can click on any one of these counties and you actually get to see what the population driver or population change driver is in each county. You'll also get the 2010 population as well as the 2019 estimate. And then one thing you'll want to understand about this map is that because these are estimates, the 2010 decennial count was actually what was used for the base for these estimates. And so the farther away we get from that decade number, that 2010 number, the more likely we are to see some error. So it is possible, this is a little bit of a preview to what the 2020 census could hold for some of these areas in terms of population, but there could be some differences because we are getting farther and farther away from that initial foundation. And that's sort of what I wanted to share with you. I don't know if you have any questions, Katie or Aaron.
I have a question, Dr. Valencia. So this is really from it originated at our Facebook, and Genesis answered, there's a Brittany who posted on our Facebook and asked just to try to understand the relationship between, we say roads, we get roads based on census data. And so can you kind of describe to us what agencies directly kind of use this data and what that process looks like, kind of what's on this map, but then also what's going to come out in the census?
Sure. So basically specifically when we're talking about roads, there's a lot of federal fundings, right? Over, $1.5 trillion in federal funding that gets allocated to different types of programs. So for instance, for roads, it would be like a state agency like TxDOT that would receive federal funds for new highway construction and planning, as well as other types of funding for different kind of rural transit areas. And a lot of what that actually, we're currently working on a project with TxDOT that looks to see which areas are going to become more urbanized or more rural, because it really informs the funding formula at the federal level to assess how those dollars are going to be allocated throughout the nation. And so Texas wants to understand how much of that big pie are we going to be able to get? And those numbers really depend on those decennial count. And so we're actually helping TxDOT to understand where we're seeing the growth, where we think some of these areas are going to change in terms of those population thresholds and be either categorized as rural or urbanized, and then understand how that's going to shift the funding for a lot of these places. But what really becomes important is that you know, we talk about what size of the pie Texas is going to get, but as Anne mentioned in her introduction, 1 of every 11 people lives in Texas, right? And so if we have an undercount in the state of Texas, not only does the state of Texas get a smaller piece of that pie, but we actually shrink the entire pie for the whole country, right? Because we're such a big state. And so not only do we get a smaller piece, but we, in essence, I guess, get a smaller piece of an even smaller pie.
I love that, Lila, the way that you're explaining this data. In terms of, I think in terms of kind of our pre-prepared questions, you kind of covered everything. So I'd love if anyone on the webinar right now has questions for Dr. Valencia or on our Facebook Live. But while some questions might be coming in, Lila, I'm going to ask you on a personal level, why is the census so important to you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I've been thinking about it since you've been asking other folks about that. And for me, it's kind of a two-part question, right? There's definitely the data geek answer where, like I mentioned, you know, the decennial count is critically important for the work that we do. We are mandated by the legislature to produce population estimates and population projections for the states and its counties. And the foundation for those programs are the decennial count. So without a complete count, we are less able to reflect the reality of the growth of Texas, right? And then, you know, beyond that, we also then provide those estimates and projections to other state agencies to plan for their work and how they're going to allocate resources throughout the state. And so it becomes really important what that denominator is. And so I think because we're in the time of COVID right now, understanding those denominators has become really important to people and really crystallized in a special way, right? Because the way you look at that denominator or what that denominator is really shifts what the, you know, response, what the severity of risk is or the mortality risk is for a population. And if you don't have an accurate denominator to do that, then you really aren't representing the reality of what's happening in the world, right? And then the other part of it for me is a more personal part, right, is I have a 7-year-old daughter. And so I understand, I have kind of a sobering understanding of how important decennial count data is to her education and to the education of her little friends. And so that becomes really important to me too.
Thank you much for sharing, Lila. We do have a question. Folks know that that the data informs redistricting and that there's been some conversation about potentially pushing the deadline back. Could you talk a little bit about one, how the data informs redistricting, and 2, why pushing back the deadline for the census could potentially negatively impact that data?
Sure. So the state of Texas, the Texas Demographic Center has been traveling with the state of Texas legislature, the House and the Senate, and testifying at the redistricting hearings. And one of the pieces of information that the redistricting hearings have been putting out there for the public is a timeline of what those redistricting dates look like, right? And so there's a couple of constitutional mandates that are part of the census operation. And so that first one is the data, the apportionment data have to be made available to the president by December 31st of 2020. And then they continue to process the redistricting file. And then that redistricting file is made available to governors, state governors, and it needs to be available no later than April 1st of 2021. But because Texas has, and there are some other states like this, has a different timeline where they are in legislative session and they need that additional time, or not additional time, but really they need as much time as possible to complete their redistricting. They try to get them those data as soon as possible. So they start sending data out like in a set of 8 states per week, starting February 1st, 2021. And we want to be able to get those data as close to February 1st as we can, because essentially the legislature has about 60 days to produce redistricting. And this is redistricting, you know, for all House districts, all Senate districts, and it's a really intense process, right? And the more community and public input we can get into that process, the more that people will feel well represented. And both chambers have been, really talking about wanting to keep this very transparent. And so we want to allow there to be that much time so that this transparency and public input is available. If we get it later and later, and it got to the point where delays in the Census Bureau delayed the redistricting file delivery, that could mean that the state legislature would not be able to redraw their districts and enact redistricting maps by the end of the regular session. If that were to happen, then a special body of 5-member committee would, made up of the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House and 3 other members that they would select or appoint, would serve and draw the districts for the state as a whole. Now, this wouldn't be ideal because, like I mentioned, there wouldn't be enough public input around that, and it wouldn't be a fully, more transparent process. And so we really want to help the legislature to pass their redistricting during the regular legislative session.
Thank you, Lila. That was a great answer. And again, so just to let folks know, we're really hoping that the census does stay on track and that the deadline to respond doesn't continue to be pushed back due to COVID-19. And again, if anyone does have any questions for Dr. Valencia or anyone else that was on today's call, now is the time to send those via the chat box or on Facebook Live as well. But before that, thank you so much, Dr. Valencia, for sharing your knowledge with us about kind of where we're at in Texas. And I think one really big takeaway is talking about the importance of looking at those census tracts and making sure that we're getting all of our undercounted populations counted in the 2020 census. So thank you. While I have a minute, I do want to share out, so thanks again, folks, for joining us for our Census and Coffee webinar. We've had a lot of great speakers today talking about all things census and looking at it through different lenses. But coming up, which is kind of our next on deck, will be our Let's Spread the Word Together. And so it's really a social media power hour. And so during that time, we'll be making sure that we are actively sharing on our different social media handles about the importance of the census, but we'll also be completing the census challenge as a group, which should be pretty fun, but also talking about how potentially a text tree works and seeing if we can get one of those going with folks in your network. And then of course at 2, we'll be doing Rethinking the Ground game. And so this is an opportunity to kind of identify what those safe in-person options are for repurposing some of the materials or collateral we might have, and establishing some great connections and partnerships with organizations who can help you rethink your outreach in your communities. And so I think that will be both of those sessions will be really good interactive workshopping sessions to making sure that we get out the count in our state. So, and then of course our Hard to Count happy hour happening on Instagram Live this afternoon at 4:30. We'll be talking to folks again who are passionate about the census and want to kind of share out why it's important to them, but also why it's important to make sure that their community is counted as well. So, Erin, I'm not sure if we have any questions from folks I think we've been kind of answering them in real time, which has been good. And I'm not sure if there's any on Facebook.
Nope,
also, if any of our I'm going to say if any of our panelists have any kind of parting words of wisdom for folks engaging in outreach efforts or one key takeaway that they want to share that they might not have gotten a chance to share out, I would say now is the time before we kind of end our little coffee date with everyone.
I guess I would just say thank you so much to everyone who has been doing all of this really amazing work all around the state. Thank you so much for all your efforts.
Likewise, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that a lot of our direct outreach had to be shifted, but we're still on track. We're still making a great headway, and so we still have a fighting chance.
Yep. And thank you, Katie and Erin.
And if, oh, I think I have a
One question, we're going to jump all over it. Oh, that was not a question, but a comment. So Jesus Montalvo says, thank you for helping us have our voice heard. So thank you, Jesus, for hearing our voices today.
And I don't see any questions, and so I'm going to say something very lame. But for folks that might have seen High School Musical, had younger siblings or kids that watched High School Musical, they have a song called "That We're All in This Together." And so, but we really are all in this together in terms of getting out the count in our state. We know that we don't have a state-sponsored complete count committee, nor any dollars coming from our state to get out this count. And so this work has really been on the backs of Census Champions like you, on our local governments, our nonprofits, our business sector, our healthcare, faith, all of these folks who are coming together to make sure Texans get counted. And so I just applaud you, and I'm so thankful for the work that you've been doing. And again, we're really all in this together, and so making sure we're supporting folks and getting out the message about the importance of getting counted. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I think, yeah, Berta just shared out, folks are sharing out some of their YouTube, Twitter things as well. Please share those with us so we can make sure other folks get them as well. And then, of course, Lila kind of put it in there. Thank you to the Census Bureau as well. Y'all have been working so hard, connecting with us, and you have, I know, huge areas that you're trying to cover to make sure folks are counted. And we are so thankful for your partnership and support in getting out the count here in our state.
All right.
Cool.
More questions. Oh, somebody said, sí se puede, and I agree, Jesus. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And just refer back, if you would, to our social media and the email, which is how most of you found out about this session, for our schedule for the day. There's still lots of time to get plugged in, and we want to be as interactive and responsive as possible. We understand, just like all of our panelists have covered today, that so many of us are re-strategizing, and we definitely all want to be your partner in that. So just let us know how we can help, and we look forward to working together more.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.